Just a few months ago, a shocking announcement sent ripples through South Africa and beyond. 70,000 white South Africans declared they wanted to leave the country, claiming persecution under the black majority government. The headlines exploded when US President Donald Trump stepped in, offering them special refugee status in the United States. For many, it seemed like political theater, but then it got real. Just weeks ago, a group of 49 white South Africans touched down on American soil, accepted as refugees under Trump's proposal. But their arrival sparked a storm. Suddenly, what started as a controversial immigration issue escalated into an international political firestorm. At the center of it all, Julius Malema, South Africa's most outspoken and radical freedom fighter. Trump didn't hold back. He publicly called for Malema's arrest, accusing him of inciting hatred and being a threat to the white South African community. But now, a far more serious question hangs in the air. Will the South African government obey Trump's demand? And if they do, what does that say about their sovereignty and their commitment to justice? This isn't just about politics. It's about power, race, and control on a global stage. Let's find out what really lies beneath the surface. May 21st, 2025, the Oval Office. What was meant to be a diplomatic meeting quickly turned into a global headline. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa had flown into Washington, D.C. to address growing tensions between his country and the United States. At first, the mood was light. Smiles were exchanged, golf stories shared, but that calm didn't last long. Then, Donald Trump made his move. Sitting behind the resolute desk, he demanded that Julius Malema, leader of South Africa's Economic Freedom Fighters Party, be arrested. The room fell cold. The tone shifted instantly. And Ramaphosa? He froze. What followed was nothing short of uncomfortable. As Trump launched into allegations of white genocide in South Africa, Ramaphosa barely pushed back. He sat quietly, fumbling his words, as if he were a schoolboy being scolded, not a president defending his people. And then came the video. Trump signaled to his team, and suddenly, a screen lit up in the room. It was footage of Julius Malema chanting, "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer," a controversial liberation song born in the fire of South Africa's anti-apartheid struggle, a song that once galvanized resistance against a brutal racist regime, a song filled with history, pain, and pride. But now, weaponized in the Oval Office, used to paint Malema as a threat and justify Trump's demand for his arrest. This was no longer just diplomacy, it was humiliation. And the question echoing across South Africa now is, why didn't Ramaphosa fight back? And more importantly, will he obey Trump's demand? Or will he finally stand up and draw a line? As a proud South African with a deep connection to his country's history, Julius Malema has never shied away from the past. On more than one occasion, he has led crowds in singing the iconic liberation song, "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer," a chant born during the height of apartheid, when black South Africans were brutally oppressed under white minority rule. In March, that history was pulled into the global spotlight when Elon Musk shared a clip of Malema singing the song, claiming it was proof that white South Africans were under attack. But Malema pushed back, hard. He reminded the world that not even during the darkest days of apartheid did black South Africans retaliate with mass violence against white citizens. To suggest that the song incites murder, he argued, is a deliberate distortion of history. But it was this very same clip, stripped of context and charged with political intent, that Donald Trump played during his Oval Office meeting with President Ramaphosa. As the video played, Trump turned to his guest and branded the song bad. Ramaphosa responded cautiously, saying that Malema's views do not reflect the government's position. He reminded Trump that Malema is not part of the executive. He's an MP, and under South Africa's constitution, he has the right to speak freely, however controversial his words may be. But Trump wasn't satisfied. He interrupted, voice rising. "But why wouldn't you arrest that man?" That man said, "Kill the white farmers." And then he danced. He is dancing, and it's killed the white farmers. The silence that followed said it all. This wasn't just a disagreement over policy, it was a collision of two nations, two histories, and two visions of justice. And now, the world is watching to see if South Africa will stand by its constitution, or bend to foreign pressure. The moment was chilling. President Trump leaned forward, his tone growing more forceful. "If someone stands up in Parliament and sings about killing a certain group of people," he said, "they need to be arrested, very quickly." Then, he pointed to the screen again. Footage of a packed stadium in South Africa. Tens of thousands gathered, chanting along with Julius Malema. "That's not a fringe group," Trump said. "That was a stadium with almost 100,000 people, and there wasn't an empty seat in sight. That's not just a crowd, that's political power." To strengthen his case, Trump produced white crosses, symbols he claimed represented murdered white farmers in South Africa. But he didn't stop there. His accusations escalated. "South African farmers just want to get out alive," he said. "They're being hunted, executed, and no one's talking about it." Then, turning his fire toward the press, he added, "If we had a real media, real journalism, this would be on every screen in the world. But we don't, because they're silent." And then came his final, most explosive claim. "This is land theft. People's farms are being taken, and in many cases they're being killed, not by the government, but by others who know they'll never face justice. And the world just looks away." At that moment, the Oval Office wasn't just a room for diplomacy. It became a courtroom, a stage, and a battlefield. One man was making a case, another was on trial, and outside those walls, an entire continent was watching, wondering whether its leader would defend its truth or bow to foreign pressure. To drive his point home, Trump unveiled what he claimed was irrefutable proof, a photo taken years ago, showing rows of white wooden crosses along the N1 highway near Polokwane. According to him, the traffic scene in the background wasn't just cars, it was a tribute, a national mourning for slain white farmers. And with that image, Trump doubled down on his claim. "This is genocide," he implied. "This is what Malema is encouraging with his song." So let's break it down. In Trump's version of events, a song, rooted in South Africa's long fight against apartheid, is now a call to arms. And the only real evidence? That a handful of white South Africans, many of them farmers, have chosen to leave the country and seek refuge in the United States under his proposed status. That's it. No concrete footage, no verified massacre reports. Just a photo of crosses from years ago and a politically charged interpretation of history. And yet, he speaks with absolute certainty. With the confidence of a man who believes perception is stronger than proof, Trump has clung to this narrative like gospel. Even more disturbing, the silence from white South African leaders. Many of them, knowing full well that these claims are exaggerated or outright false, have refused to speak out. They've let the narrative grow, unchecked, weaponized for foreign agendas. Isn't that wild? In a world flooded with information, one man's version of events, without evidence, has become international policy talking points. And the question now is no longer just about Malema's song. It's about truth, power, and how far a lie can go when no one dares to confront it. And this is why Trump demanded Malema's arrest. But the response from the economic freedom fighters came swiftly and unapologetically. Just hours after Trump's press conference, the EFF released an official statement that hit back with fire and fury. In it, they accused the US president of distorting history and twisting liberation chants into weapons of fear. Trump proceeded to play numerous clips of the president of the EFF, the statement read, wherein our leader spoke correctly about the unequal distribution of land in South Africa and sang the chant, "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer," a song that calls for the destruction of white minority control over South Africa's land and resources. But the party didn't stop there. They reminded the world that this very song had already faced South Africa's highest legal scrutiny. The Equality Court had ruled it was not literal hate speech, but a symbol of resistance, deeply rooted in the country's struggle heritage. The Supreme Court of Appeal and Constitutional Court had both upheld that ruling. This wasn't just a defense of Malema, it was a defense of history, of culture, of the legal right to resist through memory and song. Then came the political bombshell. The EFF accused President Ramaphosa of cowardice, of denouncing his own country's courts in front of a foreign president, all to appear compliant. The statement went further, claiming that Ramaphosa's actions were not isolated, but part of a larger betrayal. They alleged a secret pact between the ANC and white minority interests, pointing fingers at opposition leader John Steenhuisen, who reportedly confirmed a strategic alliance to keep the EFF out of power. And finally, the EFF didn't mince words. This meeting between Ramaphosa and Trump confirms the 2024 alliance between white minority capital and the neoliberal, counter-revolutionary ANC. What started as a song has now become a symbol of a nation's internal war, between memory and narrative, between resistance and reconciliation, between those clinging to the past and those demanding transformation. And the world? The world is watching closely. The silence has been deafening. Despite the public confrontation, despite Trump's bold request, the South African government has yet to take any concrete action. No arrest warrant, no condemnation, no official support for Malema either. President Ramaphosa's office issued no follow-up, no statement reaffirming constitutional rights, no defense of the judiciary's ruling on the chant, just silence. And in that silence, a haunting question lingers. Is the South African government standing firm or standing aside? And more importantly, how long can that silence last? Back in South Africa, President Ramaphosa finally stood his ground. He stated clearly that Julius Malema would not be arrested and that South Africa is a sovereign nation with its own laws and courts. He reminded the public that the Constitutional Court had ruled the chant, "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer," was a historic liberation slogan, not hate speech. But here's the contradiction. Why didn't he say this when he was with Trump in the US? In Washington, Ramaphosa appeared passive, almost submissive. Yet back home, he spoke with confidence and clarity. If he had nothing to prove, why defend South African policy abroad at all? To understand that, we must go back to the roots of the tension between the US and South Africa. A story not just about politics, but about sovereignty, pressure, and the lingering shadow of foreign influence. In January, President Trump suspended the U.S. refugee resettlement program, stranding over 100,000 displaced people worldwide. But just a month later, in a stunning twist, he signed an executive order granting refugee status exclusively to Afrikaners, South Africa's white minority. Trump claimed, without evidence, that the South African government was killing Afrikaners and seizing their land. The source? His longtime ally, Elon Musk, who has pushed this narrative for years. By May, the impact was clear. Over 70,000 white South Africans expressed interest, and the first group landed in the U.S. to media fanfare. At Dulles International Airport, they were welcomed like heroes, greeted by high-ranking officials and handed U.S. flags. Their arrival cemented the image of white South Africans as victims of genocide, a narrative built more on political theater than proven fact. At Dulles International Airport, the U.S. Deputy Secretary of State welcomed the white South African refugees with open arms. "It is such an honor to receive you," he said. "Seeing you hold our flag sends a powerful message. The United States rejects the persecution of people based on race in South Africa." It was a moment heavy with symbolism and controversy. According to the Trump administration, the arrival of the first 49 refugees was just the beginning. The White House announced plans for a larger relocation effort, possibly granting refugee status to all 70,000 white South Africans who had expressed interest. This narrative, framed as racial persecution, was fueled by Elon Musk, who publicly accused the South African government of committing genocide and stealing land from white citizens. The backlash was immediate. With aid suspended and diplomatic pressure mounting, President Ramaphosa traveled to the U.S. to ease tensions. Officially, it was a dialogue to improve relations, but beneath the surface, the real reason was clear: to defend South Africa's land reform bill, a policy that had sparked outrage among white landowners and became the center of an international misinformation campaign. And now, with Trump fully convinced of a genocide that never happened, South Africa was suddenly forced to answer for its sovereignty on foreign soil. Tensions between South Africa and the U.S. had already been simmering. South Africa's support for Palestine at the ICJ and its growing alliance with Russia only deepened the divide. With trade privileges like AGOA under threat, President Ramaphosa made the controversial decision to travel to Washington and plead South Africa's case directly before President Trump. But for many watching back home, the visit felt like a humiliation. Instead of standing firm, Ramaphosa appeared cornered, visibly subdued, uncertain, and deferential. And then came the moment that stunned observers across the continent. He offered South Africa's critical minerals to the US. "We've got critical minerals you need to fuel your economy," he told Trump. "We have that on offer." Was this diplomacy or surrender? To critics, it was yet another example of an African leader trading national wealth for Western approval. In a country like South Africa, with its deep scars from colonialism and apartheid, such gestures cut even deeper. Rather than using its resources to build its own industries and assert true independence, South Africa was once again offering its riches to the highest bidder. It left many asking, when will African leaders stop bowing? When will they stop selling the continent's future to preserve outdated alliances? Because true independence isn't granted at the White House. It's claimed and defended on your own soil. You see, when a president like Ramaphosa bows so easily to foreign pressure, it sends a chilling message that the long, brutal history of injustice in South Africa may never truly be corrected. Let's not forget where this history began. In 1950, the apartheid regime passed the Population Registration Act, which classified all South Africans by race, Black African, colored, or white. But it was the Group Areas Act, passed that same year, that laid the foundation for apartheid's brutal land theft. It carved up cities into racial zones, banning Black, colored, and Indian South Africans from living, working, or even owning land in areas reserved for whites. The impact was devastating. Families were torn from their homes, businesses were destroyed, and entire communities were erased overnight. Then came the Land Acts of 1954 and 1955, which legally ensured that 80% of South Africa's land was handed to the white minority. To keep the system in place, the government reinforced the notorious pass laws, forcing non-white South Africans to carry identification just to move through their own country. This wasn't just segregation, it was state-sanctioned dispossession. And now, decades later, when leaders talk about partnership while offering up mineral wealth to the same powers that once turned a blind eye to apartheid, it makes you wonder, has anything really changed? Or are we still watching history repeat itself, only this time with a handshake and a press conference? In 1958, Hendrik Verwoerd, known as the architect of apartheid, became South Africa's prime minister. But instead of dismantling the brutal system, he gave it a new name: separate development. What followed was one of the darkest chapters in South Africa's history. Under the promotion of Bantu Self-Government Act of 1959, the government carved the country into 10 so-called Bantu homelands. The goal? Divide and conquer. By fragmenting Black South Africans into isolated ethnic zones, the regime could pretend there was no Black majority and no unified voice for resistance. But that wasn't the worst part. In a move that would traumatize generations, the apartheid regime forcibly removed more than 3.5 million Black South Africans from rural areas labeled white and dumped them into the Bantustans, dusty, overcrowded territories stripped of resources, opportunity, or hope. Their stolen land was handed over to white farmers at a discount. What remained was poverty, pain, and silence. And while this mass displacement unfolded between 1961 and 1994, the world watched. Governments, corporations, and global institutions stood by. There were no sanctions, no interventions, just silence in the face of one of the 20th century's most egregious human rights crimes. Because apartheid didn't just thrive on cruelty, it thrived on the world's indifference. Isn't it ironic? A land reform bill meant to correct decades of brutal injustice against Black South Africans is now being framed as a tool of oppression against white citizens. For generations, the world stood by as millions of Black families were stripped of their homes, their land, and their futures. No outrage, no intervention, just silence. And yet now, with a law that hasn't even been enforced, one that doesn't seize land but simply proposes reform, suddenly, the US is up in arms, ready to defend so-called victims of oppression. That's not justice. That's hypocrisy. And with President Cyril Ramaphosa appearing increasingly aligned with U.S. interests, it's hard not to wonder, will the injustices of apartheid ever truly be addressed? Will Black South Africans ever reclaim what was taken from them? Perhaps Trump's refugee offer will do exactly what apartheid never could, remove the last claims to white ownership. Maybe then, Black South Africans will finally begin to reclaim their land, their dignity, and their future. But what do you think? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe for more untold truths about Africa and the world.